Welcome to Bloodlines and Bottomlines, the show where we explore what really happens when family business and identity collide. I'm your co-host, Robert Moskovits.
I'm your other co-host, Gershon Morgulis.
And each week we sit down with someone brave enough to talk honestly about the messy, complicated, beautiful, and sometimes painful realities of running a family business. These are the stories behind the legacy, the stories behind the trauma, the stories behind the bottom line. And today's guest, Gershon, you go do the honors.
Today's guest is Ben Goldbaum from the Automatic Group or Stewart Center. Maybe we'll ask him about, sounds like they got a bunch of companies there. But anyway, Ben is the grandson of the founder and the COO. And if I understand correctly, he's probably going to be CEO eventually, but maybe we'll ask him about that a little bit. And Ben has a background in private equity. He's been in a bunch of other industries. And then at some point he came back to the family business. So that's looking forward to learning more about that and about his experience, both in the family business and also really coming back into one. Because a lot of the people that we speak to really grew up in a family business and they were kind of there their whole life. And I think we're going to get a different story from Ben. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, as am I. I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
But wait, Gershon, what is the family business? People want to know.
Oh, what's it called? It's called the Automatic Group.
Okay, good.
The Automatic Group or Stewart Center. But I tell you the truth, it's actually like the first time when someone introduced us, we'll give a shout out to Patrick. Patrick from Adventure Media introduced us to Ben. And I'm like Googling this company. I'm trying to like figure out like what is it, which one is it, and like there's a bunch of different names. Why don't we just start there? Is this a roll up? Was this like a bunch of different family businesses that combined? Were they all family businesses? Where did that?
Sure. Well, great question, and so I think it's best to give a bit of the history of the family business. So,
sure.
My grandfather, Stewart Center, started the organization. I guess it was back in 1958. I think is the year. And the company started as an irrigation company under the name Automatic Irrigation Design, which still stands as our sort of most well-known and largest business by volume. He had two partners in the business, and they grew that into, a very well-known irrigation service and installation company. Largely across Long Island, mainly Nassau County, but it extended into, eastern Long Island, including Suffolk, and then west into the boroughs. From there, it wasn't so much a roll-up as sort of a hodgepodge or growth and addition of various divisions and industries. So I'm trying to remember the exact sequence, but I think what came after irrigation was our tennis division, so tennis planning. As tennis was becoming popular across the U.S. in the 70s, Stu obviously saw that popularity growing and saw the opportunity to step into that world. So he started building tennis courts and becoming one of the better known tennis court construction contractors on the island. And so that's still, one of our main divisions as well. So the second, tennis planning. From there, we also added, I shouldn't say we, but Stu and his partners added an alarm company, home security alarm company, Automatic Alarm Co. That was, I believe, back in the 80s. Again, largely serving Long Island. We're based in Nassau County, so our core focus was always around Nassau, but we extended east, extended a bit west into the boroughs as well. And that alarm division, again, largely residential, but we ended up building, or they ended up building commercial arm as well, working with various chains and brands along the island to build out a commercial footprint too. And then in the 80s, we grew into sort of the next evolution of the sort of home services tangential space, which was luxury construction. And that's now what I'd say Stu is known best for, and one of our, more premier brands, which takes on his name, Stewart Center Inc. And that's our construction management division. So in that division, which again, we still have very heavy involvement in, we act as construction managers and oftentimes general contractors for renovations or large scale new development. Mainly residential. We've done a few commercial projects here and there, but largely on sort of the North Shore of Nassau County. Just sort of made sense. That was where it started, where Stu is based, and it's sort of where we focused. But we've done work in the Hamptons, we've done work in the city, and so that's sort of the divisions as we know them today. There's a few other smaller divisions that the company has as well. We have a small boutique real estate brokerage and a few other related services as well, but that sort of roll up into the other brand.
Oh,
Got it.
well, first of all, that's amazing. The question I have, which is maybe not one you would think of, is I love the name Automatic, right? Because that kind of harkens to a time of, I don't know, like, do you know the history of that? Because that's really...
It's, you know what, the name Automatic started with automatic irrigation design, and so when we say the Automatic Group, it's honestly what I prefer to refer to the organization as.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Because again, we had Automatic Alarm Company,
Mhm.
Automatic Systems Co., which was a division for some time, and Automatic Irrigation. So it made sense, and there's a sort of forward-looking theme to that name that I really
Yeah.
like. And it's, it has the name group in it, so it sort of encompasses everything that we do. Automatic irrigation design, the sort of the genesis of that was, these are automatic irrigation systems. And so when back in the 60s, late 50s and 60s, when Stu and his partners were first installing these systems, that's when, automated or automatic irrigation systems were first basically becoming popular.
Right.
Previous to that, you'd sort of go out on your lawn, spray
Yeah,
the
yeah.
lawn with a hose, or set out one of those unattended, lawn irrigation systems. But
I remember my parents turning on the sprinkler with
Right.
one of those sticks, that they had, and you
Sure.
turn the thing.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's come a long way, but largely, the irrigation space has grown, but has largely stayed the same, right? We're still looking at similar systems today as sort of we were ages ago. The parts have changed. The overall philosophy has stayed the same, though.
My other question is, I know I got rapid fire questions. Sorry, Gershon. How many people are building new tennis courts? Is it servicing, or are there people are there like, oh, I can't wait to have a tennis court on my property?
You know what? It's both, and we do both. So we do new court construction, all different types of courts. So we've got the all-weather courts, we've got hard true courts, we do synthetic turf, real turf, and then more traditional red clay as well. And so we do new construction for all those courts, and we service all those courts as well. We've got, on any given year, a couple dozen new court constructions across the island and, in the boroughs. A lot of new court construction happens, I'd say, on the North Shore of Nassau County and out in the Hamptons. As new developments come around, as people have, kind of an old dilapidated court that they want to upgrade or change over to a new surface material. But then every year we have sort of a recurring line of business from the service of these courts as well. The hard true courts require regular maintenance, whether it be yearly, biannual, to keep the surface material essentially up to snuff and playable. And then all weather courts, look like the most durable, and they really are. They're an asphalt base, traditionally an asphalt base with a few layers of acrylic paint on top. But asphalt is sort of, especially in this climate, can move and can develop cracks over time. So, over 10, 20 years, there need to be some service and adjustments made. So we're constantly doing that, repainting. And then in recent history, we've been doing a lot of pickleball work.
Yeah, that was
I was
yeah,
going to
that's
ask
right.
about pickle.
Yeah.
So new court construction for pickleball has been just ripping over the last 5 years.
I can imagine.
And a few reasons. The footprint you need is a lot smaller. So you have properties that previously, due to setback requirements or overall lot coverage issues, couldn't really afford to have a full-size tennis court. But with a pickleball court, you need substantially less space. And, it gives people a way to stay active. It's become a very popular sport. And And also we've done a lot of conversions of existing all-weather courts to pickleball courts as well.
Mm.
It's as simple as sort of restriping or adding a few lines so that people can still play tennis, but also, add the functionality of playing pickleball. So, trying to stay current and keep up with those
Yeah.
times. There was something we noticed really towards the beginning of COVID, was getting popular. And, we've been able to really help a lot of our existing clients and new clients, basically get what they need.
Gershon, so you can get that pickleball court now.
I don't
Tennis
think we
court,
have room
enough
for that.
property, that's fine.
Gotta move out to the Hamptons to have room for that.
That's, yes.
Um,
Lay out, play some pickleball, that'd be nice.
yeah. So, which do you prefer playing, Ben? You
Me,
like
tennis or
pickleball or
pickleball?
tennis?
I'd say in that world, I'm sort of a purist. I love pickleball because I grew up playing ping pong, and I think the two are sort of the same. Just one is basically just the other blown up, right? You have
Right.
pickleball feels a lot like ping pong in that way. It's a much quicker, faster paced game. But I grew up playing tennis, and for that reason, I feel like there's just this connection that I have with the game, right? It's where we started as a brand, the tennis planning brand. It's still, a much more popular sport globally. Obviously, pickleball has picked up in the States. And, I play both whenever I get the opportunity. I love to play both. They're both competitive. They're both enjoyable. Pickleball has probably a little bit of a reduced barrier to entry, which is really nice. But for me, if I had to pick one, I'd still play tennis long term.
Okay. So let's jump into some of the other stuff, the family stuff. When you think back to your childhood, what was the biggest, or what's your earliest or most prominent memory of the family business? And then related to that, were your parents, was your mom or dad involved? Or is this just like a grandpa thing? I know my grandfather owned a business. He never wanted any of the kids involved.
Sure.
It was like, and I remember like my grandparent from the other side said, like, to my grandfather, like, why don't you bring your son into the business? He's like, it's no life. I don't want him to have this. And like, even when he was looking for a job, he's like, no, go like find a good job. Like, this is not where you want to be. So anyway, so like, what are your earliest memories, and were your parents involved? And if not, why not?
Sure. Yeah. On the second part of that question, I think I'll answer that first. So my grandfather has two daughters, so my mom and my aunt. Neither of them were really interested in the business. My mom had her own career when, my grandfather was growing his business. Then I came along, and it just didn't mesh with sort of what his two daughters were interested in. And, he hasn't said this to me, but I wouldn't be surprised if he said that he didn't view the business as something that he wanted his daughters in either, right? I mean, at the time, it was sort of a high growth, very involved, personally intense business that was his life. And I think much like many family business owners, they really don't see their children in that business. It's sort of their own. I'm not saying this was how sort of my grandfather had it, but a lot of family business owners sort of view it as their own sadistic experience that they don't want to pass on to future generations, right? They've made their own success, but it's been very difficult for them to do that. So I think there are pieces of that may shine true, but overall, his two daughters just weren't interested in the business. And my father's a physician, so it didn't work out where he had involvement. So, it was really just Stu and his partners. And so, I came along growing up. I grew up around the business. There were a number of construction development projects that I remember pieces of growing up. I sort of, one of my earliest memories was sitting on, an excavator at a 100-acre property that turned into a multi-lot subdivision on the North Shore. And, that was sort of my first memory of construction and the business. And obviously at the time, I didn't know all of the other components that were part of the business and that went into the business. But I was surrounded by it, right? Growing up, I was surrounded by construction. I was surrounded by just the nature of of how Stu involved his personal life in the business too. It was very integrated in a really seamless and nice way. So, I would meet with him and meet clients and meet architects, not knowing sort of what I was surrounding myself with. But there was this sort of, learning through diffusion or osmosis that just naturally happened. And so, yeah, as I think to my younger memories, I do think largely of the construction element of the business. It wasn't until probably my early teenage years that I really started to learn more about the other aspects of the business, the tennis, the irrigation, and my knowledge really kind of grew from there.
Did you always expect to join eventually?
No, I never did. Which probably, I feel like it's so polar, right? For next generation family members who join businesses, it's either they always thought they were going to, or they never thought they were going to. There's never really a middle ground. And I fall into the latter part of that camp. When I graduated college, I went to school up in Boston. I had my eyes set on sort of building my own career. I graduated back in 2018, and I started working in investment banking. I worked at Citi for 2 years. Then I moved on to private equity, focusing on real estate acquisitions. Most of my career was around real estate acquisitions and real estate finance. So I guess it did have this element of real estate in it from the beginning, right? Like I was sort of surrounded by real estate with my grandfather on the construction side, and I chose a career path that was somewhat adjacent to that world. But really, it wasn't until probably about 4 or 5 years out of college that I started having conversations with him and exploring the possibility of coming to work for the business.
And how did he react?
He was excited. I think he was in the camp where he would love me, at the time would have loved me to join the business. It gave him an opportunity, and me an opportunity to get close with him, and him to get closer with me. I've always had an excellent relationship with him. And, I think he saw it as something where he was able to sort of pass down this legacy and really keep the name of the business going. Because up until my involvement, there was really no future plan for the organization or any sort of distinct succession plan.
Would he have hired an outside CEO, or he would have just shut it down?
I think the other opportunity was to find a suitable purchaser, and essentially divest from the organization when he decided to hang up the gloves.
So you're the only family member currently involved in you and your, right?
Correct. Yeah. Okay. There have been one of his partners, there are a few other adjacent family members that are still involved with the business, which is great. But I'm the only sort of, I guess, immediate family member from his side that joined the organization.
And when you have that conversation, you decide to join, you kind of have this understanding of what's going on, but then you kind of open the books and you kind of see what's really going on. Do you remember your first reaction to, oh boy, I'm sitting here now, I'm the COO or something, and these are all the things my grandfather didn't tell me.
Right.
There's got to be that, right? Because, people run different, he ran it his way, and successfully too, but his way.
Right. Right. And I came from, it's clear to see I came from more of an institutional background, right? I worked at Cerberus Capital Management. I worked at various other kind of development and real estate investing arms that were very kind of white collar in nature, where, the job and the role I had was pretty focused and streamlined, and I knew what was expected of me and what I had to do. And so there was a big culture shock as it came to that. To just learning how to operate a business, how to operate and manage other people and work with other people in a distinct manner. But I'd say, it's interesting because I think it's a great question, because I think you could probably ask anyone who joins, purchases, becomes involved with a small to mid-sized business, especially a family business. I think the biggest thing that's a shock is just how different it is from your expectations. And for me, I think the big shock And one of the biggest challenges was this sort of merging of roles that was required. I joined thinking I had a relatively loosely but somewhat defined role and set of responsibilities. Um, and that immediately evaporated. What I thought was going to be my focus turned into sort of 5 or 10 other things because, at the time of my joining, his existing partner in the business was retiring.
Mm.
And his partner in the business, Ken, was really kind of the core engine behind all of the operations and existing admin work in the organization. Bookkeeping, accounting, and then all of our internal processes and sort of day-to-day management. And so I wanted to join, and I was excited to join, learn from Stu and learn, and help grow the business. But I very quickly had to just take on the role and responsibility of just keeping things afloat. And so a lot of things had to get shuffled around. I really had to refocus my attention and try very hard to manage my time appropriately. So that was the biggest shock, just knowing how much more was involved and expected of me as opposed to what I might have expected coming into the organization.
Yeah, I think you have to become a generalist.
100%.
And you end up, which is hard for people like us, where we're used to a set of goals and we have processes in place and we can specialize on one thing and do it really well.
Right.
I think, like you said correctly, in a small business, family business, you're doing everything.
Yeah, I mean, I spend the first 5 years of my career, I could build a very comprehensive real estate acquisition model, and I know exactly what to do and exactly how to approach the market and think about those various dynamics. But it was pretty pigeonholed. Obviously I had some analytical expertise, or, I learned to problem solve. That was the biggest thing that helped me long term.
Yeah.
Right. The other skills, kind of in air quotes, that I was learning over the first number of years of my career really had no distinct application to what I've been doing. It was sort of the problem solving, the sort of stress management, and the ability to, put out fires and know which fires really need attending to.
Yeah. And then hopefully not putting out fires after a while, putting processes around the fires so that they become
and that was
manageable.
Right. And sort of to come back into why I joined the organization, that was a big reason where I saw opportunity, right? Like clearly, as you said, the organization was successful. My grandfather was successful and able to build something that was durable, that had longevity, which was great and really was a big driver to my joining the organization because there was a legacy to it. And, there was something that I was able to connect with over. But when I took a look into it, there were so many opportunities for, operational improvement and modernization that just seemed like, needed doing. And not that I historically had any, success in doing that previously, but it felt like a good opportunity for me to sort of try to flex the problem solving skills that I learned in the first number of years of my career and to be able to sort of impart change and lend my own impact to this organization.
Yeah, put your own signature on it too.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
important.
I think one of those things, though, that a lot of people can mess up in joining an organization like this, and I had my fair share of faults that fall along this path, is kind of coming into it gangbusters and thinking you can just immediately affect change. And, thankfully, I have, mentors in my life, and I talk to other people in the organization who really cautioned me away from doing that. And it's not really my personality to do that. And so I didn't approach the business, just banging on doors, chopping wood down, trying to make change. Instead, I tried to approach it from just the opportunity of listening to people, learning from people, and just learning the existing processes in place, and then absorbing that, making my own comments on what worked, what didn't work, because it certainly all wasn't bad. Like I said, it's been successful for 60 years.
Yeah.
They have to be doing something very, very right.
Right.
And then it was just around the edges, right? Where might there be opportunity that, if you're looking at something the same way for 40 years, you might be missing. And so it's been helpful to have that new set of eyes. But yeah, it's been very, very fun, but a massive learning experience.
Now, you're coming in and you're saying that you took things slowly. You're not here to burn the place down, at least not on day one, and like start fresh.
Right.
So, and hopefully it's all around the edge. Now, how did the other people in the organization view you? And then part B is, although it might really just be connected, do they view you differently because you're family? Meaning, one, how do they view the new partner or whatever that shows up, right? You took over for the old partner, so now you're the new guy. But also, how does being related to the other guy kind of interact with all that?
It's a great question. It was my biggest fear coming into the business, because a lot of the people at the organization I've known for most of my life. I have some relationship or I know them. And so it wasn't like I was just a new face coming in as sort of an executive or a manager, which has its own difficulties, but you have the benefit of sort of being anonymous. I was now coming in some cases, friendly with people. And so it made things in their own way a bit challenging, because my legacy, I didn't really have one, but people already knew me. It's already been to some extent written, or people have already thought about what they might think about me. So I think I came in with that in mind. And I'm just, in terms of like the leadership style that I have, I'm not the type of person who kind of has no association with people in an organization and just tries to manage, in the most efficient manner possible. I think, my personal philosophy is, building relationships ends up building a better organization. And so that's what I spent my time doing. I've been able to build relationships with all the people in our office. I think there is something to consider, knowing that I am basically, call a spade, a nepotism hire. Right? I am the founder's grandson.
No, wait, well, Ben, wait, because Gershon and I literally talked about this yesterday. This is our fourth show.
Mm-hmm.
Never used that word because we don't think, right? We were debating this.
Sure.
I don't know if, I mean, that's so, first of all, it's brave for you to say it. I'm being honest about that.
Sure.
But once you affect all this change, is that maybe the nepotism part, maybe the hiring part could be nepotism, but then after a while, that must just go away.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
it's wild that you said that because we were just talking about it yesterday. And so
I think I also, like, if I see something, I'm just going to call it out because people might be thinking about that. And, if someone wants to think that, who am I to say they shouldn't?
Sure.
But I also know, like, what I think I'm capable of doing and what I've been able to do over the last 2-3 years. And I think it does speak for itself. And I think, I've failed. It's been 2 to 3 years. I can't call that any extended period of time yet, right? That's a very, very short window to really measure success over. But, I think that's a fair point. Like you said, I got here because, to some extent, I'm related to the founder. But I think it's fair to say, it doesn't take away from the level of work and sort of dedication that I have to the organization.
Yeah, that's right.
It could actually give more dedication.
Right.
That is one of the benefits of nepotism hires.
Good point.
Because
there's a big emotional component, right? Because, a failure at work, you get upset with yourself. Maybe, your manager, kind of talks to you about what you could have done better. But there's a big emotional component to it now, right? Because it's this business that someone in my family built, and now to some extent it's sort of resting on my shoulders not to screw that up. And so there's a lot of pressure and weight around every decision, and so I agree with that. To some extent it adds complexity just sort of on a psychological level, but I think it's important to try to leave that at the door, because the only thing it's really going to do is sort of weigh you down and complicate being efficient in the workplace. But, look, I think sort of to the earlier question, my goal was just to try to integrate myself well with the existing employee base and not to come in acting as just the founder's son or the founder's grandson. I I wanted to be known as sort of my own person and my own, and be able to make my own, kind of put my own signature on things, as you said. And so I think I've been able to do that. I think time will tell how well that will sort of go over the long term. But I think for anyone moving into family business, it's important to just recognize that you are part of the family, because people in the organization will be thinking about it from time to time. But it's also important not to let that, drive how you act, right? At the end of the day, you're an employee of the organization. Your goal is I would say, much more aligned with a traditional manager or employee in the long-term success of the business, because you have an emotional connection to it. So use that to your advantage.
How many employees do you guys have?
So it's a relatively seasonal business, just the nature of what we do. One thing I neglected to mention is, as part of our tennis arm, we do a lot of landscape construction. So that feeds into the seasonality as well. So our irrigation,
you have to winterize your sprinklers, right, and all of
correct,
this, turn them back on. I just moved here, so I'm learning all of that stuff.
Yep. Oh yeah. So it's, our big season is really April to, I'd say, October, November, with a few lulls during that period. And then in the winter months, we drop down to about 30 to 35 full-time employees. But in the peak season, we're close to 90, 95.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Yeah. And, what's really nice about the organization, and one of the things I really do stress, because it's something, I'm proud of, not because I've had any impact on it, but I'm proud to call this out as an organization that I work at. Our employee tenure is on average very, very long. I'd say our employee tenure is probably 20 plus years.
Wow.
So we have a lot of, especially on our construction side, our project superintendents, we have employees who've been with us for 25, 30 years. And then on the irrigation side too, our lead technicians, a lot of them have been with us for decades. So I think it says something about, what Stu's been able to build, what, management and middle management in the company has been able to foster and create. And that's something I want to keep going, right? Like there's no doubt there's something great about having new people join an organization, but when you're able to have, long-term tenured people at a company, it says a lot about the culture.
Yeah, that's right. Especially now. I mean, people, my wife will kill me for saying this. She's had 2 jobs in 4 years. I mean, she's a startup person, so that's kind of very normal,
Mm-hmm.
You're like, oh, but
yeah, I mean, it's sort of the world that I started in too, right? I worked in investment banking, and it's almost comically known as that, right?
Correct.
You do your 2 years of banking, and you jump to hedge fund or PE,
right.
And
you get
then
recruited away, and you get constant, all of that. So that's right.
Right. So in that world, it was a very different transition, right? Like when I look at hiring new people for our organization, it's exclusively, long-term hires.
Yeah.
Obviously, our employees and new recruits are, what they want to do with their career long-term is totally up to them, but we want to create an organization and a workplace for them that they could see themselves thriving in for the long term.
Before I get to the AI question and how that's affected anything, where's the swimming pool division and the jacuzzi division?
Yeah, that falls within our tennis planning arm.
Okay.
So when I think,
Gershon just messaged me, can Ben build me a jacuzzi? Yes.
When I thought of our tennis planning arm, it started as a tennis court construction company, but it grew into really a full-scale site development and landscape arm. So for a lot of our new construction projects, and also we're brought on as a subcontractor a lot of times, we will do full landscape construction, including, all of the planting and softscape, hardscape, patios, masonry, pools. So the pools we do are shotcrete gunite pools, and tennis courts to the extent a property has them. So that all sort of falls within that arm.
Okay. So you thought of it. I didn't have to tell you that. Okay.
I want to ask another question about tenure at a family business. So I was speaking with someone yesterday, and they were telling me how they're the business. Incidentally, it's a family type business. The multiple generations have been involved over the years. And he also talked about tenure, but he had a very, very different perspective on tenure. What he said was, our people have all been there for 30 or 40 years. He's like, their way of doing things is old and backwards. And like, I was talking to this person about their future at the business, and they were like, you know, these are the people my grandmother hired, and they're great people, but like, what would I like? They're all going to retire. They're all 65 or whatever, something like that. It's like, it is keeping people. If people stay forever and you don't grow and you don't like bring in that new blood, it's really a double-edged sword. And I'm just curious, you think that that's like is that something you see that you're going to like hit a cliff? I guess cliff is the right word, right? Like an age cliff where like
Sure.
half the company is going to retire tomorrow.
Yeah.
And do you think that that's more of a small business thing or more a family business thing? Like, how do you view that?
It's a good question. On the latter part of that question, I would assume it's relatively universal in small business. I think it's especially prevalent in family business. And is it a risk? Absolutely. It is the biggest double-edged sword, to this point that exists. I talked about the benefit of long-term tenure. It doesn't take away from the fact that we're still hiring and bringing on, new people. Because like you said, you have people cycling out. Is there, when I worked at Citi, we'd think of sort of a debt cliff, or, sort of a maturing loan portfolio. And so everything kind of happening at once. And so to some extent, it's quite similar, right? If you have an aged employee base, you can run up against a pretty scary cliff where sort of everyone is at that age of retirement around the same time. Coming into this, I was cognizant of that. We are still constantly hiring new people, looking to bring on, kind of fresh blood to the organization. And with that comes new perspective, right? And so the change that I'm trying to affect, I think will land quite easily with those new members of the organization because they haven't been trained on the old ways. But also what I'm trying to do is nothing so drastic that the existing team won't be able to follow. And that was the other thing that a lot of people cautioned me about doing, right? You can come in, even if you've given a little bit of time, but when you do try to make change, don't try to change everything all at once.
Yeah.
It's better to piecemeal it or try to stage it in a way that you're able to control the change management more efficiently. Because, one philosophy certainly could be, scrap everything, make it the most efficient that you believe is possible, and bring everyone new in. A lot of private equity firms do that when they, when they buy portfolio companies, right. And I'm sure it's quite efficient. I'm not the type of person, it's a massive risk for our organization to do something like that. And there's enough really solid bones in the organization where we don't need to do that. And we've had enough success in, in the small things we've been doing along the way, where I see the opportunity of keeping the existing personnel, right? It's not something that I need to consider right now.
Yeah. One interesting thing happens with change is sometimes there's this peer pressure, essentially. So even with employees that have been there a while, if they start seeing that newer team members are doing this thing and they're not, they start to maybe wonder, well, I should maybe try this as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes they call it peer pressure or just inertia change, because you don't want to be that one person that's left over that's still not adhering to this process or whatever it is.
Right. I also typically will think of it as a management failure. Like if you have an employee base that, at a high percentage just doesn't commit to a new process or learning something new that you're trying to implement, most of the time it's probably because you didn't implement it properly or you didn't set the stage appropriately. And so that's sort of just a general philosophy I have, like look first at yourself if something fails and see how you could have approached it better.
Yeah, that's good. I like that, man. That's really good.
See, Robert Gandhi.
What's that?
Yes.
Be the change you want to see in the world.
Sure.
Take credit for a Gandhi quote, but yeah.
But look, it is always a concern. But it's also important not to be so closed-minded to think that something has to be done a specific way, or, you know, someone learning a new process has to evolve exactly how you expected it to,
Mhm.
right? It might take someone an extra couple of weeks on our bookkeeping side, right? Like we are, as of January 1st, we're rolling out a whole brand new ERP system. You know, we used to be on basically the same system for the last 40 years. And so the way of doing things is, to a lot of the employees here, dramatically different.
Mhm.
But it's not different enough to just call it a brand new process. And that was something that I was pretty focused on when we were developing this. We ended up going custom. So I was able to, you know, really focus on how big of a change I wanted to make on that first transition. And then, you know, as we continue to improve this software, it will get closer to what I want it to be eventually. And so this first stage, it was close enough to the old system where, yeah, it's still a shock to a lot of the employees, but with a couple of weeks and just some repetition, you know, they all get it, and it's not a big deal.
Mhm.
So, you know, for me, I think it's easy to get lost in that trap of, well, I've been thinking about this for the last 6 months and I know it down pat, so why don't they?
Mhm.
And it's easy to lose sight of, you've been doing this for the last, you know, 1,000 hours.
Right.
So, you know, I think that's important. And just to understand that everyone in the organization has a different role. And you've got to find a way to cater to everyone to, you know, to be able to affect change properly.
Yeah.
We were, last night at our event, we had someone who's COO of a business and, you know, with tenured employees, and we were talking about systems actually, and he said something interesting that relates to what you were saying. He said that when you're dealing with people who are used to something, it's always better to just add a button than come up with a new system that like does your thing, and now they got to learn the whole,
Yep.
relearn all the things that were working. So, you know, to your point, if it's similar to the old thing and it has a few tweaks and that helps you do it better, get what you need without like upending everything.
Right.
There's that. The flip side to that though is, and we tell this to clients all the time, if you're building custom, and this is even customizing off the shelf systems,
Sure.
but to some degree, unless there's a good reason, which sometimes there is, but to some degree, it's going to be true with custom and pure custom as well. But if you're doing customizations, lots of customizations on and off the shelf software, that's probably carrying broken processes into your new system, because like they built the off the shelf software like for best practices. They built it for what works.
Absolutely.
So, you know, again, you sometimes you have to deal with your people, and sometimes you already know it works. You don't want a new thing, but it's a double-edged sword. The whole
Yeah. And
customization idea.
I love that philosophy too. You know, building, it's such a classic issue with legacy businesses, right? Because you've built a business around, you know, people and a broken process. And so what I didn't want to do when creating this new software and, you know, spending all this time, energy, money, everyone else's time, the last thing I wanted to do was to just bring forward, for the sake of convenience, the broken processes that might have existed before. And so that was the one area where I was very focused and sort of deliberate. There were items that made the software feel similar, but the areas where I noticed just gaping process holes where, you know, there's just ripe opportunities for, you know, for improvement and optimization, those were places I wasn't willing to compromise. Because like you said, what's the point of just repeating something that slows the overall organization down? And so I think there's sort of a give and take with that, right? And so naturally, when you do that and it's drastically different, it will seem shocking to sort of the old guard. But again, you can curate it in a way, and if you're diligent enough in rolling it out, you can, you know, you can map it out in a strong enough way that people don't feel so lost at sea. But I think that's important, right? Because I've always been scared when building this software that, you know, that we were just going to build something that was inefficient because it tried to achieve a certain goal. And so I leveraged a lot of existing softwares, right? I think the one regret, if I have a regret, I wouldn't even call it so much a regret, but the nice part of using an off-the-shelf software that sort of already exists is, to your point, this has been well thought out. The way it operates that way for a specific reason, not because the existing team did it a certain way, right? This is a brand new software. And so I was able to leverage a lot of existing softwares and try to pull pieces and design it around the processes that I liked from those softwares. And what I maintained from our existing software was sort of some of the convenience in how certain pieces of data were entered. Because ultimately, when you have a staff that's been doing the same thing for 10, 20, 30 years, they get used to the process of what they do specifically. And sometimes they can lose sight of why they do it. So it's okay to tweak why they're doing it, but if you can keep that process similar, I think you'll have a much better success. You'll be much more successful in implementing that change management long term.
Yeah, I agree. Can we switch gears just a little bit, and then
sure.
We're almost out of time though, so
we're gonna wrap up.
Ask your best ones. I have more good questions, but I'm not going to ask them.
Okay, well,
we have a
this is
couple
my
of
last question. Then we'll go to Gershon's favorite part, rapid fire. Do you have children?
I do not. No.
Okay, if you did, have you thought about whether you'd want them in the family business?
It's a good question. I think I would not. I think I'd be that kind of member of a family business.
Okay, well, that's a very honest answer. And now Gershon's very favorite part of the show, rapid fire. Do you have time for a couple of Gershon?
Yeah, we'll pick a few. We'll try to skip the ones about the
He loves it, so you have to.
One of them is, which of your kids is most likely to be a business mogul? But obviously that's
what was the question?
Relevant. Which of your kids is most likely to be a business mogul? So that's what we ask people.
I am engaged, but no kids yet. So
congratulations!
Thank you.
That's amazing.
All right. So what was your favorite family activity as a kid?
I grew up playing golf. So from a very young age, actually, my dad's father was a big golfer and got me into it. And so it was just something that I loved growing up. I've been golfing since I was 4 years old. I should probably be a little bit better than I am now, but it's still something I enjoy, and it's something I've been able to share with both sets of my grandparents, with my dad. And it's something that, more than probably any other activity or sport in my life, I've really been able to enjoy with others.
What's the other one?
Let's see. What's next? What's one family activity you cut out as an adult?
That's a good question. I don't know if I've really explicitly cut anything out in terms of family activities. I think the difficult thing is I live in the city now, so I just see everyone less. Right? My parents are still on Long Island. By nature of working, for the business, I see my grandfather more than I did prior to working with the business, so that's nice. But I think just sort of the ability to spend time with everyone in my immediate family, that's just something that's reduced over time, which I wish it hadn't.
Well, you got to move to Long Island.
Move back.
Right, move back. That's right.
Especially, it'll shorten your commute.
Yeah, well, got to tell my fiance that. So that's the difficult part.
Send her to us. We both moved out here. Robert even came from the West Coast. It's even further than New York City.
Yeah, we moved from Los Angeles to Long Island. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is a show in and of itself.
Yeah, a little bit of, especially with this winter, a little bit of a culture shock there.
Yeah, it's a huge shock. And my only rapid fire question, then we'll thank Ben, is chocolate or vanilla?
Milk chocolate.
Wow, milk chocolate. Interesting.
Ice cream, vanilla.
Interesting. Okay, I'm a dark chocolate and then vanilla ice cream, but interesting. Okay. Milk chocolate. Would not have guessed that, Ben.
Yeah. All right. I got to throw a little surprise at you.
That's right. There you go.
Thank you, Ben, for joining us today, and thank you all for listening to this episode of Bloodlines and Bottomlines. If this conversation resonated with you, or you know someone who's lived through the complexity of a family business, share this episode with them. It helps more than you know. And if you have a story of your own and would like to be a guest on the show, reach out. Family businesses shape who we are, for better or for worse, and telling these stories matters. Until next time, I'm Gershon.
I'm Robert.
And this is Bloodlines and Bottomlines.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you both. It's
Thanks
been
so
great.
much.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for a great
Okay,
conversation. Thank you.